Once upon a time, 5 young women, all dressed in their Nysc uniforms, were deployed to an African village named Oreo. The village was a wonder. The air smelled of ripe fruits, the trees danced in the breeze, and the hills stood like giant gods watching over the land. The villagers welcomed the Corpers with wide smiles, bringing gifts of yam, plantain, and cloth. The Corpers felt like queens. The villagers told them, "You are welcome here, but remember, our culture is sacred. Respect our ways, and you will live in peace." The king, a wise man with a beard as white as cotton, invited them to his palace. The grand mud palace, decorated with carved patterns of ancestral stories, was the pride of Oreo. He sat on his throne, surrounded by elders. His voice was strong, like thunder before rain. "My daughters," he said, "this is a land of rules. Obey them, and you will be safe. But one thing you must never do: never enter the forbidden forest. That place is not for humans, it is sacred." The Corpers nodded, their faces serious. But as soon as they left the palace, they whispered among themselves. "Do you believe those stories about the forest, Amara?" the leader of the group asked. Another Corper, rolled her eyes. Ifoma rolled her eyes. "It's just to scare us. Every village has tales like this." That night, they were shown their new home, a cozy mud house near the village square. The scent of freshly cut firewood lingered in the air. The villagers treated them like royalty. Food was brought to their doorstep, and the people greeted them with respect. As the moon climbed the sky, the Corpers gathered outside the house, their faces lit by the silver light. They could hear villagers laughing and singing in the distance, the sound blending with the soft chirping of crickets. "This place is beautiful," Amara said, looking around, but deep in her heart the king's words echoed. "The forbidden forest," echoed, "the forbidden forest." What could be so dangerous about a forest? The night passed peacefully, but little did they know their curiosity would soon lead them down a path they could never return from. The moon was round and bright, hanging in the sky like a golden calabash. The village square buzzed with excitement as people gathered to hear the night tale. The Corpers, dressed in their night wrappers, sat among the villagers, their faces glowing with curiosity. The air was warm, but the stories made their skin tingle like cold water running down their backs. Nearby, a bonfire crackled softly, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. A little girl, no older than 10, stepped forward. Her name was Enkem, and her voice was small but strong. "Tonight," she began, "I will tell you about the forbidden forest." The crowd leaned in closer, the Corpers included. Ankem's eyes sparkled like stars as she spoke. "The forest is alive," she said. "It has eyes that see everything. If you go deep into it, you will find a tree bigger than a house. If you touch it, the tree will take you back to the entrance. But those who go too far never come back the same." The villagers nodded, murmuring in agreement. But the Corpers exchanged glances, their minds spinning with curiosity. "That's not all," Enkem continued. "Some say they've seen creatures, headless men, women with glowing eyes, and spirits who sing songs that make you forget your name." The villagers shuddered, but Amara, the leader of the Corpers, smiled. Her smile was small, like the first crack in an egg. "What nonsense," she whispered to her team. After the tale, the villagers clapped and began to leave, but the Corpers stayed behind, their hearts racing. That was just a story to scare us, Amara said, her voice firm. Ifoma frowned. But what if it's real? The king warned us. Amara laughed softly, her voice like a songbird mocking the storm. Think about it, she said. If the forest is so dangerous, why hasn't anyone seen these creatures outside it? They're just trying to keep us away from something. The others hesitated, but Amara's words were like a spark in dry grass. One by one, they nodded. Well, we'll go in the morning, Amara decided. Just a quick look. No one will even know. The night felt longer than usual. As they lay in bed, their minds were filled with thoughts of the forest. The Corpers didn't know it yet, but their footsteps were already echoing in a place they weren't meant to tread. Time passed, and the Corpers became part of the village. They taught in the school, supervised the king's farms, and lived peacefully among the people. They no longer spoke about the forbidden forest. The villagers adored them, and the Corpers enjoyed their stay. Days turned to months, and soon it was almost a year since they arrived. With just 1 week left before their service was over, Amara sat under the big tree near their quarters, lost in thought. The shade of the tree was cool, and its roots sprawled like veins over the dry earth. The others were packing their belongings and preparing to leave, but Amara's mind was elsewhere. It doesn't feel right, she said suddenly. The others looked at her. What doesn't feel right? Ifoma asked, zipping up her trousers. Leaving here without seeing the forbidden forest, Amara replied, her voice low and firm. The others exchanged uneasy glances. But we promised not to go there, said Adaze, one of the Corpers. Amara smiled faintly. We've been here for a year. We've followed every rule, done everything right. Don't you want to see if the stories are true, just for ourselves? No one has to know. The others hesitated, but Amara's words were tempting. Finally, they nodded reluctantly. Fine, Ifoma said, but how will we find the way? That evening, they called Ninkem, the little girl with the sharp eyes and quick tongue. She stood before them, clutching her doll, her face serious. The doll, handmade with straw and fabric scraps, had one button eye and a faint smile sewn onto its face. And Kem held it tightly, as though drawing courage from it. And Kem held it tightly. We need your help. The little girl frowned, her brows knitting together. Help with what? We want to know the way to the forest, Amara said, her voice soft and careful. Menkem's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly, her braids swaying like little ropes. No, you can't go there. It's dangerous. We won't go far, Amara assured her. We just want to look. It'll be our secret. The villagers will never know. She handed Ninkem a small bracelet as a gift. The bracelet sparkled faintly in the dim light, its glass beads catching the last rays of the setting sun. Enkem stared at the bracelet, then at the Corpers. Her little heart wavered. Finally, she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay, she said, but you have to promise you'll come back before it's dark. We promise, Amara said, smiling. Kem described the path to the forest in detail, her voice trembling. Her small finger pointed toward the eastern side of the village, where the trees grew taller and darker. When she finished, she looked at them one last time, her lips trembling. Please don't go too far, she begged, clutching her doll tighter. The next day, at the hottest part of the afternoon, when most of the villagers were resting, Three of the Corpers slipped away. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the air buzzed with the sound of cicadas. They laughed quietly as they walked, teasing the villagers in their minds. They've scared themselves with stories, Amara said, shaking her head. This is going to be nothing. As they entered the forest, it was like stepping into another world. The air was cooler, and the trees were tall and thick, their leaves shimmering with strange colors. A faint mist hung in the air, giving the place an ethereal glow. Flowers of every shade bloomed, and the ground sparkled as if sprinkled with stars. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rustling could be heard, like whispers carried by the wind. "This is beautiful," Adaze whispered, her eyes wide, taking in the surreal landscape. But as they ventured deeper, the magic began to fade. The trees grew darker, their branches twisting like claws. The air became heavy, and the once sweet scent turned sour, like rotting fruit. "Does anyone else feel strange?" Yvonne asked, her voice shaky. Her fingers played nervously with the edge of her scarf. Amara waved her hand dismissively, though her own steps slowed. "It's just your mind playing tricks. Let's keep going." They walked on, unaware that the forest was watching them, its silence growing more oppressive with every step. Even the birds stopped singing, and the wind felt like it was holding its breath. The Corpers moved slowly now, their laughter replaced by uneasy whispers. "I don't like this," Adaze said, clutching her scarf tightly, as if it could shield her from the creeping dread. Amara rolled her eyes, though her own heart was beating faster. "We're just scaring ourselves," she muttered. But then a sharp scream tore through the silence. It was Ifoma. She was pointing ahead, her hand trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Look!" she cried, her voice cracking. The others followed her gaze, and their blood ran cold. In the distance was a figure, a man walking slowly. But something was terribly wrong. He had no head. His shoulders moved as if he was breathing, but his neck ended in nothingness. The Corpers froze, their breath caught in their throats. The man without his head kept walking. His steps were slow and steady, like he was searching for something or someone. "Run, Amara!" shouted, her voice breaking the spell of fear. They turned to flee, but as they did, a wall appeared out of nowhere. It was tall, black and smooth, stretching as far as their eyes could see. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though it wasn't entirely solid. "Where did this come from?" Adaze screamed, pounding on the wall with her fists. "We're trapped," Ifoma cried, her knees buckling. Before they could gather their thoughts, strange creatures began to emerge from the shadows. Their eyes glowed red, their shapes twisting and shifting like smoke. Some looked like animals, others like humans, but none of them were natural. A low, growling sound filled the air, making the ground vibrate beneath their feet. The Corpers clung to each other, their fear spilling out in choked sobs. One of the women fell to the ground, her body shaking. Another stood frozen, unable to move or speak. "We shouldn't have come," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Her confidence was gone, replaced by sheer terror. The creatures circled them, the glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. The forest seemed alive, its trees leaning closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. For the first time, the Corpers understood the truth. This was no ordinary place. This was a world they were never meant to enter, and now it was too late to turn back. Back in Oreo village, the day turned strange. The sky, once bright and blue, grew dark as though a giant hand had smeared it with ashes. A fierce wind howled through the trees, rattling windows and tearing leaves from their branches. The scent of rain hung in the air, though no clouds threatened a storm. Villagers stopped in their tracks, their hearts heavy with unease. Chickens clucked nervously, and goats bleated as if sensing danger. "Something is wrong," an elder murmured, gripping his staff tightly. His eyes scanned the horizon, but there was no sign of what had disturbed the balance. The chief priest, a man with a face as old as time, hurried to the palace, his beads clinking with each step. He burst into the king's chamber, his voice urgent. "Your Majesty, the forest gods are angry. Something terrible has happened." The king frowned deeply, his heart sinking. He had lived long enough to know that when the forest stirred, disaster was near. Outside, the wind carried an eerie sound, like distant cries woven into its howl. "What must we do?" the king asked, his voice heavy with worry. The priest shook his head, his face grim. "We must act quickly. If we don't appease them, the whole village will suffer." Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Amara and her friends were running like haunted animals. The creatures they had seen earlier were gone, but the forest felt alive, watching their every move. The path they had entered was gone, replaced by endless trees and twisted roots. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the faint sound of whispers seemed to follow them. Every time they thought they found a way out, they suddenly found themselves deeper in the forest. "We need to find the way out," Amara said, her voice trembling as she glanced over her shoulder. Suddenly, Adaye screamed. She had stepped on loose ground and tumbled into a deep, abandoned well. Her cry echoed as she hit the bottom, her voice breaking with pain. "Help me," Adaye shouted, her voice filled with terror. The others rushed to the edge, their faces pale. The well was lined with mossy stones, and its bottom seemed impossibly far in the dim light. They tried to pull her up, but the well was deep and their hands were weak from fear and exhaustion. "We can't leave her there," Ifoma sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Amar bit her lip, her mind racing, but the forest offered no mercy. The forest offered no mercy. The air grew colder, the shadows darker. A low hum filled the air, like the deep breath of something vast and ancient. "I don't know what to do," Amara admitted, her voice cracking. They were lost, their phones useless, their voices swallowed by the forest. Every direction looked the same, trees stretching endlessly, their branches twisting like bony fingers. As night began to fall, the reality of their mistake sank in. The Corpers huddled together, their faces pale with regret. In their hearts they knew the truth. The forest wasn't just angry, it wanted to keep them forever. Back in the village, chaos erupted. The wind howled like a wild animal, and the sky churned with dark clouds. Villagers screamed as strange figures began to appear, headless men wandering the streets, their footsteps slow but deliberate. Masquerades with long canes roamed the village, striking the ground as if calling for blood. The chief priest worked tirelessly in the palace, chanting and making sacrifices. He slaughtered a goat, then a rooster, but the gods remained silent. The wind grew stronger, shaking the very walls of the palace. "This is beyond ordinary anger," the priest told the king. "The forest gods demand justice." Just then, Kem, the little girl who had helped the Corpers, ran into the palace, her face pale with fear. Her doll hung limply in her hand, and her usually lively eyes were wide and teary. "Your Majesty," she cried, falling to her knees. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her wrapper, her tears soaking into the dirt floor of the palace. The king leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with concern. "What is it, child? Speak." Nenkem's voice cracked as she confessed. "The Corpers. They asked me for the way to the forest. I told them." Gasps filled the room. The elders stared at Nankem, their faces a mix of shock and anger. One elder dropped his staff, the sound echoing in the heavy silence. "You did what?" one elder shouted, his voice shaking with fury. "I didn't know they would go," and Kem sobbed. "They promised not to. They promised not to. They said it was just a secret." The king's face darkened, but he held up his hand to silence the room. "We cannot waste time," he said firmly. "We must save them before it's too late." The chief priest nodded, his beaded staff clinking softly. "The gods demand their return. If they die in the forest, the curse will spread to us all." The villagers, though angry, set their emotions aside. Torches were lit, their flames flickering as the night wind whispered ominously. Preparations were made quickly, with the women chanting soft prayers as they handed supplies to the search party. The chief priest led the way, chanting as they marched toward the edge of the forest. They knew they were racing against time, for the wrath of the forest would only grow stronger with each passing moment. Deep inside the forest, Amara and her friends were running, their footsteps echoing like whispers through the trees. The creatures they had seen earlier were gone, but the forest still felt alive, watching their every move. The path they had entered had disappeared, replaced by endless trees and twisting roots that seemed to shift underfoot. "We can't stay here," Ifoma cried, clutching her side. Her voice trembled, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The faint sound of rushing water nearby added to the tension, reminding them how far they were from safety. "I'm trying to think," Amara snapped, though her own fear was evident in her shaking hands. Suddenly, Adaese's voice echoed faintly from the well. "Help me, please." Her cries grew weaker with each passing moment. Amara and the others stumbled back to the edge of the well, peering into its dark depths. The smell of damp earth and decay rose to meet them. "Hold on, Adaese," Amara said, her voice shaky. "We'll get you out." But the forest seemed to have other plans. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking like warning whispers. An owl hooted in the distance, the sound chilling in the unnatural silence. Back in Oreo village, the villagers were making their way to the forest's edge. The chief priest led the procession, his chants echoing into the darkening sky. The wind howled, tugging at their torches, and the air was thick with dread. "They must still be alive," the priest said, his voice resolute. "The gods are waiting for us to act." As the villagers approached the forest, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The priest paused, raising his hands. "Spirits of the forest," he called out, "we come to beg for mercy. Return our children to us." The forest groaned in response, its shadows shifting like restless spirits. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances but pressed on. In the forest, the Corpers were reaching their breaking point. Exhausted and terrified, they clung to one another for support. Ifoma sank to the ground, tears streaming down her face. "We're not getting out of here," she whispered. "Don't say that," Amara barked, though her voice wavered. "We can't give up." Suddenly, the sound of movement made them freeze. Twigs snapped and leaves rustled. They turned, their hearts pounding. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. Its eyes glowed a piercing red, and its form shifted between human and beast. It let out a low growl, the sound reverberating through their very bones. "Run!" Amara screamed, pulling Ifoma to her feet. They bolted, stumbling over roots and branches as the creature pursued them. The forest seemed to close in, the trees forming a labyrinth that twisted and turned with every step. As they ran, they found themselves back at the well. Adae's cries had stopped, and an eerie silence hung in the air. Adae's Amara called desperately, but there was no response. The ground beneath their feet began to shift. The corpus screamed as roots rose from the earth, wrapping around their ankles and dragging them toward the well. The creature watched, its red eyes gleaming with malice. At the forest's edge, the villagers could feel the forest's fury. The chief priest raised his hands, his chants growing louder. "Spirits of the forest, we offer this sacrifice in exchange for their lives." He held up a bowl filled with blood from the animals they had slaughtered. The villagers knelt, their heads bowed in prayer. The forest groaned, and the wind howled fiercely. Then suddenly it stopped. The silence was deafening. A faint light appeared within the forest, flickering like a distant flame. The priest's eyes widened. "They are alive," he whispered. "The gods are giving us one last chance." Amara and her friends woke to find themselves lying at the edge of the forest, their bodies battered and bruised. The villagers surrounded them, their faces filled with relief and fear. "You're alive," the king said, his voice heavy with emotion. The chief priest stepped forward, his expression grave. "But the gods are not pleased. You have angered them, and the price must be paid." The Corpers exchanged frightened glances. "What price?" Ifoma asked, her voice trembling. The priest sighed. "You are marked. If you leave this village, you were marked. If you leave this village, you will die. The spirits will not let you go." The Corpers' relief turned to despair. Their dreams of returning to the city, to their families and old lives, were shattered. "Please," Amara begged, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't mean any harm. We were just curious." The priest shook his head. "Curiosity is what angered the gods. You broke the rule, and now the rule binds you." The villagers cared for the Corpers, bringing them food and tending to their wounds, but the women's lives would never be the same. Amara, once bold and confident, now moved quietly, her legs broken and lifeless. Ifoma, who had lost her arm in the chaos, stared at the empty space where it used to be, her heart heavy with regret. Adae's bore deep scars, her once bright spirit dimmed. The story of the Corpers and the Forbidden Forest became a lesson passed down through generations. Parents warned their children, "Disobedience brings suffering. Some rules are not meant to be broken." The Corpers stayed in Oreo village, their fates tied to the land they had come to serve. They watched the seasons change, their dreams of freedom replaced by the reality of their punishment. And the forest, silent and watchful, remained untouched, its secrets hidden from those who dared to dream of uncovering them. Curiosity can lead to discovery, but it can also lead to consequences were not prepared for, just like the Corpers who ventured into the forbidden forest. Their story serves as a timeless reminder that some boundaries are meant to protect, not to confine. As we explore the unknown in life, let's remember to respect the wisdom of those before us. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that make you think. Once upon a time, in a big, bright village filled with colorful markets and lively gatherings, lived Lila. Lila was very rich and pretty. She had a big house painted in soft yellows and greens, lots of shiny clothes made of silk and velvet, and many sparkly jewels that glittered in the sunlight. Her father gave her all this money before he went to the stars. Everyone in the village said wow when they saw her walk by, with her shiny necklaces jingling softly. But Lila was a bit different. She liked to be with people who had lots of money, like her. She didn't play with those who had less. Even when they smiled at her, she sometimes didn't smile back. Her father was not like that. He was nice to everyone and shared his money. People loved him very much. They still liked Lila, hoping she'd be like her father one day. Lila didn't think about getting married. Her mother often sat with her on their front porch, surrounded by flower pots, and said, "Lila, you're not getting younger. Find someone nice." But Lila would shake her head. She said, "No, I want someone very special. He must have more money than me, be super nice, and never been married." People whispered, "Who could that be? No one is like that here." So Lila waited and waited, thinking about the man who would be just right for her. She believed somewhere, somehow, she'd find him. But for now, she enjoyed her riches. Her big house with a beautiful garden full of roses, and her shiny things, not ready to share them with anyone yet. One sunny day, Lila met Dapo. Dapo was from another village not too far away. He was rich just like Lila. He also got his riches from his family, just like she did. Dapo wore clothes with golden embroidery and rode a shiny black horse. Lila liked him because he was rich. Dapo liked her too, so they decided to get married and live together. At first, everything was sweet and happy. They laughed, ate yummy food cooked by their personal chef, and lived in a big cozy house, Lila and Dapo seemed perfect for each other. But after a while, things started to change. Lila liked to make all the decisions. She wanted to be the boss. When Dapo said, "Let's do this," Lila would often say, "No, we do it my way." She thought because she was rich and a bit older, she should be in charge. One day, Dapo had to go on a trip. He told Lila, "Please stay home till I come back." But Lila didn't listen. She went out to play with her friends and traveled far away to the nearby hills without telling Dapo. When Dapo came back, he found the house quiet and empty. He asked, "Where is Lila?" The walker said, "She left to have fun with her friends." Dapo waited for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Then Lila came back. Dapo was very upset. "Where did you go?" he asked. Lila didn't like the question. "Why do you ask? I can go where I want," she said. They argued loud and long. Dapo said, "You should respect me. I am still the head of this house." But Lila didn't agree. She was angry. "I don't need to listen to you. Any man cannot control my life," she said. And with that, Lila packed her bags filled with her favorite dresses and jewelry and went back to her own village, leaving Dapo and their home behind. She was single again, back in her big house, thinking about what happened. People in the village whispered about Leela and Dapu, wondering what would happen next. Leela's mother was sad too. She said no marriage is perfect, Leela. But Leela didn't want to hear it. She thought she would just find another man, a better one this time. After leaving Dapo, Leela met Nuru. Nuru wasn't rich like Dapo or Lila, but he had a big heart. He was the kindest man in the village. He worked as a carpenter, making beautiful furniture for everyone in the village. Leela thought, well, he is very caring. That's one thing I wanted. So Leela and Nuru decided to get married. Since Nuru wasn't as rich, he had to move into Leela's big house. He did everything to make Leela happy. He cooked yummy meals, cleaned the house till it sparkled, and even gave Leela foot rubs after her long days. Nuru would sometimes buy Lila pretty dresses with the little money he had. He always said, I just want you to smile, Leela, for a while. Leela loved it. She was happy she could control him. It was as if Leela was the husband and Nuru was the wife. She felt like a queen. Nuru was the wife. She felt like a queen. But soon, Leela started to feel something was missing. Leela saw that Nuru didn't bring in any money. He spent his days making sure she was happy, but the big house and shiny things needed money to stay. Leela thought, Nuru is nice, very caring, but he's too lazy. He never contributed much to the family. Instead, all he does is just sit and enjoy my own labor. Then one evening, Leela sat down with Nuru on the porch. She said, You are very kind, Nuru, but kindness doesn't fill our pots with food or keep this house. Nuru felt sad. He wanted to make Leela happy, but he didn't know how without money. Leela's mother talked to her. Leela, you have to choose. Do you want Nuru's kindness or someone who brings in money? A man who has so much time to care all day and night would barely have much time for work, my dear. Much time for work, my dear. Leela thought hard. Finally, she said, I need more than kindness. So Leela told Nuru, You need to leave. You're not the husband I need. Nuru was very sad, but he packed his bags, including his simple handmade tools, and left. Leela was alone again. She had everything she wanted in her big house, but she wasn't happy. She missed Nuru's kindness, but wanted more. The villagers whispered, Leela has sent another husband away. What will she do now? After Nuru left, Leela felt a bit lonely. But then she met Kweku. Kweku was like a dream, everything she had wanted in a man. He was handsome. He was rich, very rich. He was also kind and caring. And he had never been married. Kweku wore elegant robes and had a beautiful smile that made everyone admire him. Leela thought, wow, Kweku is just perfect. So Leela and Kweku got married, and it seemed like Leela finally found her perfect match. Kweku was everything Leela wanted. He bought her beautiful things, took her to fun places, and always made sure she was smiling. They danced at festivals, they laughed under the moonlight, and their house was full of joy. Leela felt very lucky, but after some time, things started to change again. Kweku was nice and good, but Leela sometimes forgot to be nice back. She didn't say please or thank you. She didn't cook or clean. She thought, Kweku loves me, so I don't need to do these things. Kweku had friends and family who would come over. Leela didn't greet them nicely. She just said hello without smiling. Kweku's family was very important to him, especially his parents, but Leela didn't visit them or help them. She said, "Why should I? They can take care of themselves." Kweku's parents noticed this. They said a wife should be kind and respectful, not just to her husband, but to his family too. They were upset. They told Kweku, "Leela isn't right for our family." Kweku was sad, but he knew his family was right. He loved Leela, but he also knew respect and kindness were important. So Kweku talked to Lila. He said, "We can't be together if you don't respect me and my family." Leela was shocked. She didn't expect this, but Kweku had made up his mind. Leela packed her things, including her jewelry box, and went back to her village alone again. Back home, Leela thought about Kweku. She had everything she wanted, but she still wasn't happy. She started to wonder, maybe it's not just about finding the perfect husband. Maybe I need to be a better wife too. But it was too late for her and Kweku. When Leela came back to her village after leaving Kweku, she got a big surprise. A flood had come and washed away a lot of the village, including the farms that made Leela so rich. Suddenly, Leela didn't have all her money anymore. Her big house didn't feel so big when there was no food to eat or money to spend. Leela and her mother had to leave their big house. They moved into a small hut, much smaller than anywhere Leela had ever lived. At first, Leela felt very sad. She missed her soft bed, her shiny things, and her beautiful clothes. Now, she wore simple dresses and helped her mother cook with whatever food they could find. The hut was small, with a thatched roof that leaks when it rained, and the walls were plain and bare. Living in the small hut, Leela started to think a lot. She remembered Dapo, Nuru, and Kweku. She thought about how she acted with them. "I had 3 good husbands," she said to herself, "but I wasn't a good wife. I wanted to be the boss with Dapo. I didn't value Nuru's kindness, and I didn't respect Kweku or his family." Leela saw that she had been looking for the perfect husband without thinking about what it means to be a good wife. "I was not nice," Leela realized. "I did not share or help. I only thought about what I wanted." In the small hut, Leela learned to live with less. She talked to her neighbors, the ones she had ignored when she was rich. They were nice to her. They shared their food and stories. Leela started to help others too. She shared whatever she and her mother had. Leela's heart began to change. In the small hut, she learned to say please and thank you. She learned to listen and not always be the boss. She found out that being rich with money wasn't the same as being rich in heart. One day, Leela said to her mother, "I was wrong. It wasn't my husband's fault. It was mine. I forgot to be kind and respectful." Her mother hugged her. She was happy to see Leela understanding. Living simply, Leela learned a big lesson. She discovered that being happy doesn't need lots of money or being in charge. Happiness comes from being kind, sharing, and respecting others. Leela was ready to be not just rich, but also a good person. As Leela started to live her new, simpler life, she met someone unexpected. His name was Gogo. Gogo was very different from the men Leela had married before. He wasn't rich, and he had been married once. He didn't match any of the things Leela used to want in a husband, But there was something special about Gogo. He was kind, he laughed a lot, and he cared about Lila in a way no one had before. Lila and Gogo became friends. They talked, they helped each other, and they laughed together. Gogo would bring her flowers from the fields, and Lila would cook meals for both of them. Lila liked how Gogo made her feel. She didn't worry about being rich or being in charge. With Gogo, she was just Lila. One day, Gogo asked Lila if she would marry him. Lila thought about it. Gogo didn't have a lot of money. He wasn't what she had always said she wanted. But Lila realized those things weren't what made her happy. Being cared for, sharing laughs, and helping each other, that's what made her happy. So Lila said yes to Gogo. They got married and started their life together in the small hut. It was a happy life, simpler than Lila's life before, but fuller in many ways. Gogo and Lila didn't have much, but they had each other. They shared everything they had and worked together to make their little home a place of love and laughter. Lila was loyal to Gogo. She didn't look for someone richer or more powerful. She learned to appreciate what she had. Gogo and Lila respected each other. They listened when the others spoke, and they helped each other without needing to be asked. Their neighbors saw how happy Lila and Gogo were. They saw how Lila had changed. She was kinder, she smiled more, and she helped others. Lila had grown. She learned that happiness didn't come from having the most money or being in charge. Happiness came from sharing life with someone who cared, from being kind, and from being content with what you have. Lila and Gogo's marriage was not like the stories of riches and palaces. It was a story of true happiness found in a small hut with simple clothes and simple food. But it was their story, and it was their story, and it was filled with love. Lila finally found what she was looking for, not in wealth or power, but in a heart that matched hers. In the quiet of a beautiful evening, Lila sat outside her small hut, looking at the stars. She thought about her long journey, from the days of living in a big house with lots of shiny things to now living simply with Gogo. Her heart was full. Lila remembered how she once thought that having a husband who was rich, caring, and never married would make her happy. She had married Dapo, Nuru, and Kweku, looking for happiness in what they could give her or how they made her feel. But each time, something was missing. It wasn't until everything changed, until she lost her wealth and lived a simpler life, that Lila found true happiness with Gogo. Lila learned that happiness wasn't about being rich or being in charge. Happiness was about sharing, understanding, and loving. She learned that no marriage is perfect. Every relationship has its challenges, but it's how you face those challenges together that matters. It's about understanding each other, making compromises, and being there for one another. Lila realized her mistakes. She saw that she had been looking for perfection in her husbands without being willing to give the same in return. She understood that a happy marriage isn't about finding someone who meets all your criteria, but about building a life together where both partners feel valued and loved. As Lila looked at the stars, she felt grateful for her journey. It had taught her about the true meaning of love and happiness. She was thankful for Gogo, for his love, and for the life they shared together. The moral of Lila's story is clear. No marriage is 100% complete. What makes a marriage perfect is not finding the perfect person, but finding someone you can grow with, understand, and compromise with to build a strong, loving relationship. Happiness comes not from seeking perfection in others, but from appreciating what you have and from the love and understanding you share together. Leela's story is a reminder that the key to a happy life and a happy marriage lies not in the wealth or status of your partner, but in the love, respect, and understanding you share. And that, in the end, is the most precious thing of all. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.